Hey everybody, this is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, my show where I sit down and talk to other writers, and it's getting a little attention. I'm getting a little traction. People are appreciating, I think, hearing about the stories and the journeys of these other writers. And as you know, I don't typically focus on any particular book of somebody's. I'm much more interested in kind of how they became what they became, because I always look back at my own journey and be like, that was weird. So I always want to kind of almost compare notes with other writers, and I love hearing about their choices with what they write and how they navigate the industry. Because most writers, first they struggle just figuring out how to write, and then when they start to get published, they have to navigate actually how the publishing industry works, and that takes a different kind of mindset. So I'm always fascinated to hear other people's experiences, and I really had a great time talking to my guest today because they went through that whole journey, and it took a long process, and now they have massive success. And it was just interesting to hear her perspective. So today I spoke to acclaimed writer Tracy Clark. She's the author of the Cass Raines Chicago mystery series featuring Cassandra Raines, a hard-driving African-American PI who works the mean streets of Chicago, which is where Tracy's from. Tracy has won, she's received Anthony Award and Lefty Award nominations and has said Best Book of the Year by Library Journal. She's really had a lot of success. But that success didn't come easy. That success took a long time. And as you'll hear in our conversation, there were years and years and years of just figuring shit out. Like, how do I write a story? How do I write a mystery? How do I find an agent? All the while not kind of even realizing, the network available to writers in terms of like Mystery Writers of America and ITW and some of these organizations where you can get a lot of feedback and you can have a lot of networking and support. That all kind of came after she finally published her first novel. But she was fascinating to talk to. Her newest book is called Hide, a Detective Harriet Foster thriller. It's already got 11,000 reviews on Amazon, and it just came out in January. So she's getting a few eyes on her book. I think you're going to like this one. I really had a good time talking to her. This is my conversation with Tracy Clark.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to meet you over Zoom.
Same here.
You probably do.
Nice bookshelf.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I can't claim that I've read all of them. I've gotten to the point now actually where if a book doesn't grab me, I just, not only do I not finish it, I don't keep it. Where are you at in your life with that?
I finish. I sort of give the writer the benefit of the doubt. It might not be my cup of tea, but I sort of stay with it to see where the story goes. Now, if
Interesting.
It's just completely not my thing, then I've put one or two books down, but most of the time I just sort of stick with it. And apparently, most of the time I'm sort of pleasantly surprised at the end.
Well, that's okay. That's your patience being rewarded, and that's very generous to the writer. I think most of the problem is me, because I don't read nearly as much as I should, because if it's during the daytime, I'm like, I should be writing. I shouldn't be reading. So I read in bed at night, and that becomes very precious time, because it might be 5 minutes before I fall asleep. So I feel like it takes me forever to get through a book. So a book's got to really yeah, a little bit. So, but I'm one of those writers who just is unfortunately not as big of a reader as I used to be. Do you plow through books, or are you finding yourself kind of?
I used to before I started having to write them. I would just read one after the other, finish one, get another one off the pile, start down. So I would read all the time. Now I sort of read at precious moments.
Yeah.
Kind of like you.
That's what it is.
I have that 45 minutes in the bathtub, or that 30 minutes right before you fall off to sleep. That's my reading time, and I try to get as much in as I can. But it's precious time, so I agree with you there.
And it's interesting as a writer, what you read doesn't always become what you want to read, because you might be asked to blurb things. You might be, so all of a sudden it's like homework. and you might be excited to blurb a book, like whoever, depending on who the author is, but it's like, okay, I've got to do this. So if I'm blurbing something, I actually carry the book physically around with me. And, that way I'll make sure I squeeze in 5 minutes here and there, because otherwise it would take me forever. But it becomes difficult. And then you have to blurb a crappy book. That's the worst.
Well, luckily so far I've been real lucky with that. So I haven't had any crappy books that I've had to blurb. So I've been sort of happy with the stuff that I've read so far. So good.
That's awesome.
Don't jinx it. Don't
sorry.
Jinx it
no, that's all good. So you're in Chicago. You are. I was just kind of researching you a little bit, but you are hardcore Chicagoan. Is that right?
I am. I've been here my whole life. I'm not going anywhere unless something catastrophic happens. But yeah, this is my town.
My publisher's up in Chicago in the source books up in
all right.
the suburbs. Are you near city, in the city, or you're out in
I'm in the city on the south side, Sox territory.
Okay. Oh, right on. So you're not dealing with horrific commutes that I hear about from the suburbs of Chicago into the city every day.
Heck no. In fact, my day job has us all working from home. So I've been here since the pandemic. It doesn't seem that that's going to change anytime soon. So my commute is about 2 minutes from upstairs to downstairs, and it can't be more perfect, especially in the wintertime.
So you like that. So because I have I have a day job as well. And, we were obviously full-time away. And now it's just kind of like whatever we want. So I go in a couple times a week. But to me, I kind of look forward to it. Maybe because I have a puppy now, and like the dog drives me crazy. So I get excited to go into the office now.
I couldn't be happier. Some of my coworkers sort of miss that sort of office atmosphere. I'm not one of those folks. I love sort of having my quiet time in my den, do what I need to do, and then get on to other stuff. So I love it.
Do you consider yourself an introvert? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many writers are.
There's an extrovert, and then there's me way over on the other side of the scale there.
I see.
That little dot right before the scale drops off. That's me.
Right. So you're like, pandemic, this is awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry for you guys, but thoughts and prayers. But it's wonderful for me.
I've interviewed a lot of writers, and man, that's you are probably in the majority of that sentiment. I think writers in general, and I'm curious to know kind of about your journey, because a lot of writers I talk to who are introverts, it's like my escape were books. I was in the library. I was never happier than with my nose in a book. And sure, I had friends, but the main thing was just all the stuff that was going on in my mind. Was that kind of, does that ring a bell for you?
That's exactly how it was. I was just that weird kid who always had a book on them. And I had friends and people I hung out with, and I would go out and do whatever kids do. But then I'd have that time when I come in, and there my book would be, and I would sort of read my stories, and they would sort of ring on my doorbell and said, "Are you coming out or not?" And most of the time it was not, because I would be in the middle of something. So, so you have your little stuff, but you are basically, your nose is in a book, your nose is in a story. You're trying to figure out how it's all done. You sort of ride these characters to the end, and that's where my passion was. And
do you remember what you were reading back then, like as a kid? Like, did you
anything? I liked. I started with Dr. Seuss, of course, at that time, and then I sort of gravitated to Harriet the Spy and all those wonderful books. Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew. I sort of got into the mystery sort of genre. That sort of segued into Agatha Christie. And I think I was 12 or 13, and I would just sort of read one after the other. I'd finish one, I'd pick up another, and I'd read all the way through. That sort of got me into that sort of wave of female crime writers in the early 80s, Grafton and Paretsky and Valerie Wilson Bresley and Eleanor Teal Blank. So it's sort of had a progression. Started off little kid, sort of in the genre of mystery, found these wonderful mystery writers. That's where my sort of mojo was sort of headed. And so I stuck with that. So that got me here. It's a wonderful journey, I think, and I kind of like it.
Do you remember what it was that you liked about mysteries? Were you finding yourself like, I want to read the book because I want to figure it out? Or did you just like the intrigue of it? Like, what was it about going down that path as a reader that was really pulling you in?
I think it was partly the puzzle of it. I was trying to figure out who done it, who
Yeah.
was the bad guy, why. The motivation was important to me too. Why did somebody kill? Why did somebody do the bad thing?
The
I just
psychology
sort of
of it.
I got into sort of that mindset of what makes a person do something not white, horrendous even. So that sort of appealed to me. So I think that got me going. And then I just sort of got to a point where I said, you know what? I'm going to try to write one of these myself. I think I
Hmm.
can. I think I can do it. I think I have a little something, and I wanted to sort of see also someone like me on the page. Grafton was great. All the others were great, but there weren't a lot of us on there. So
Hmm.
I wanted to sort of put myself there and see whether or not I could write a protagonist that sort of looked like me and sort of felt like me or thought like me or sort of came from the same place I came from. And so that began the journey.
So,
That became
ha-
the quest.
and then how old were you at that day? So did you go to school specifically for, I mean, was that in your plan all along? Like, I'm going to study, I'm going to get an MFA, or I'm going to study
No,
English, or
no. And there was no part of my brain that seriously thought that I had what it
right,
took to be a writer. Nobody I knew was a writer. I
right.
didn't know any writer. Didn't know no writers in my community on my block. So I sort of had this sort of secret thing in my heart that I think I can do it. I kind of want to do it. I'm going to try to do it at some point. But it took several years before I actually sort of sat down and said, I'm going to do it. I think I can do it. And then, of course, the years of frustration sort of hit in. You don't know how to do it. Nobody really knows how to write a successful book. You just sort of get in
Or
there.
even how to write a book, period, if you don't have any
Yeah,
background in it, because I was the
you know,
same way.
yeah, I took courses in college, of course, creative writing and all that sort of stuff,
Okay,
but that teaches you only a certain bit, doesn't
right.
it? It tells you what a story should be, what elements a story has to have, but you have to sort of actually get in there and move the words around on the page to sort of teach yourself how to do it. You can take every course there is known to man, but there's also that jumping off point where you said, well, I've got the foundation as much as I'm going to get. And then the rest of it, I have to just sort of fly and see what happens.
Yeah,
So
and that
that's what
jumping
happened.
off point, I'm fascinated by, because that there is this inflection point, right, for in all writers' lives, and in all non-writers' lives who want to be writers. Because how many times have you met somebody and they find out you're a writer, and then they tell you like, "Oh, I've always wanted to do this. I hate," all the time. Like, there's so many more people than I expect. So I'm always curious about, like, okay, at some point somebody who's decided to write did, like, literally sat down and
Mhm,
did it, and what caught, and it's so painful, and you don't know what you're doing, and you
mhm,
don't know if it's any good, and to finish it is nearly impossible. But there's that something extra that
mhm,
a novelist has that let them do that.
mhm.
And so what was that point for you where you just sat down? Did you have the story in your mind, and you just like, all right, this, I don't know what I'm doing, but I if if I don't do something, it'll never get done.
I had a character in my mind. I didn't have a story. I had the voice in my head. Cass Raines, who was my intrepid PI. That's the character that I started off with. So I sort of started hearing her voice in my head and, thinking about what a story around her might be. But I started with character, put her on the page, and then see where she went. I had to have a dead body, of course, so I just sort of plopped one somewhere that I thought was interesting. And then I followed her in the case, step by step, lead by lead, breadcrumb by breadcrumb. And that's how I did it. I did that for decades, where nothing happened. I would write and revise again. And then I got to that sort of cocky point where you say, oh, I think this is perfect. And I'm going to send it to an agent or an editor or whatever. And then, of course, the rejection letters come back, right? They come back in droves. They come back. And so
But did
that
you
went
know
on
that
for several years.
that happens to everybody, or you kind of
Well, yeah, I did, but it happened to me. I mean, so that's the
right,
difference.
right.
I don't care about what happened to everybody.
Right.
This happened
Yeah.
to me. So the rejection letters are coming back. I'm thinking the thing is done, perfect, great. This is the best I can do. But then some of them came back with advice and suggestions
Yeah.
of what you might sort of do to sort of make it better. So I would advise writers to sort of take that information, use it, make your stuff better, try again. And I think what kept me going through all those decades of rejection and sort of not going anywhere was just a certain amount of pigheadedness. You have to sort of believe that
100%.
what you're doing is good or can be good, as long as you sort of put the work in and learn what you need to learn and get where you need to go. So that's pigheadedness, spite, also a good motivator.
But also humility, right? Like
Yes,
because you said
absolutely.
it, like rejection is the greatest powerful tool that you can, if you can get past your ego. And most struggling writers have zero ego because they're like, I stink. So if you can just absorb, I mean, my first 3 books never sold, and I would just read these rejection letters from these editors and be like, wow, they wrote me 4 paragraphs of why they don't like my book. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Take that in. And during this time, were you ever part of like a critique group or anything like that? Or
no, I probably should have been. And in fact, after the fact, once I sort of got, contract and everything, learned that I could have joined Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America along my journey, which would have made it a little bit easier. But I sort of white knuckled it to begin with because I didn't know any better.
You don't know about those things.
Yeah, but I thought it was me in the pages, and it was up to me to sort of teach myself what I needed to know, take that advice and those suggestions and incorporate them and get as good as I could possibly get and try again. It wasn't until after I got my contract that I joined, all the organizations where, all the people were, all the writers.
And isn't that a weird thing to find out that writers have like conferences and there's like lots of them?
You were here the whole time.
But it makes perfect. Like every other industry has these conferences. It makes perfect sense. But I remember, I joined like MWA and ITW well before I was published, and I was just like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, this is amazing.
I figured it was all up to me to sort of get this thing done. And I sort of missed an opportunity to sort of have that fraternity and that support and people who actually knew the information and could sort of, give me the 411. So I got it after the fact, not so much before. I just sort of had to sort of dig in there and sort of figure out what I needed to do and sort of get through that sort of golden door.
Right. And so for these decades of rejection, because you kind of have a 2-part purpose. One, you wanted to write these mystery novels and you want to make them as good as possible. And 2, you wanted to have representation of a character who looked like you. When you were getting all this feedback, how did that all play in? Were you getting any kind of feedback about race or anything like that? Or was it like the plot didn't work for me? Or
well, a little bit of both. When you're sort of starting out, you don't really know what makes a story work, right?
Right.
You have to
even when you're established, you don't know what makes a story.
You sort of have to feel those things and sort of, learn and teach yourself. But one of the rejection letters that I did get, it had sort of a line in there that said, "Well, she's not Black enough." And to this day,
what does that mean?
I have exactly. That's what I. That was the first reaction. What does that mean? And then, of course, those were back in the days where, agents were sort of like tiki gods, and you sort of took your basket of tribute up to the steps and sort of put it there and sort of hope they just sort of shined on you. And so you couldn't ask questions. You couldn't go back for any more feedback. That letter was that letter, and they had to just move on to the next one. So I never truly learned what not Black enough meant. I still don't know today, but I just kept going. I figured I knew what Black was, or at least a part of it. I'm kind of Black, and so I sort of know that experience. And I was not going to sort of rely on an agent somewhere in New York to tell me what Black was or what was not Black enough. And so I just kept going. So I just sort of took that rejection letter, put it on the pile with all the rest of them, and kept going. The character was there. I thought the character was good. I still do, and it is. And I had to sort of come to the point where I knew more than they did, and sort of keep going. So I did, and that's where I am.
Yeah, and one of the hardest things I think, as either an aspiring or established writer, is how to listen to the feedback without listening to all the feedback.
Right.
Because you'll get 1,000 different opinions. And even in a critique group with 6 people, you'll get 5 different opinions, and the story can't go 5 different ways. And it takes a long time to figure out not only like what makes sense, but what resonates with you and what feels honest and true and organic to how you're writing. So when somebody says it's not black enough, that's just what, it feels like that's an easy thing to be like, okay, that's just it's like a review. You're like, okay, you don't get it. That's okay. That's your opinion, but that doesn't have to reflect on how I think about how I move forward with this story. Right. So what was that break then? Was that break that getting that agent?
I think so. Again, back to the rejection letters. Occasionally you'll get a nugget of information that helps you. One of the last ones I got was from an agent who said, you would probably benefit from a writer's group. And so, of course, my introverted self suddenly panicked, because that means people, right? So your work, which is kind of sensitive to you, it's your personal baby, and in a room with other people in it. So I Googled in Chicago, writers groups, Chicago. A writers group popped up. And in a moment of stupidity, I sort of joined it. And then sort of panicked, because now I had to go.
Right.
So I did go. I forced myself. I slept all the way up to the north side, which is kind of like going to the moon in the city of Chicago. We've got the south side and we've got the north side. I'm a south side kind of person. This writers group was way up by Wrigley Field, which is kind of like going to Jupiter. So I went. So once a week on a Wednesday after.
Once a week. Wow.
Once a week, I would work my day job, and then I would schlep up to the Wrigley Field to this writers group and have my pages read. And I did that for 2 years.
Wow.
Sort of massaging this manuscript and sort of revising it over and over again, and learning the tools of what make a successful story, and beginning and middle and end and all that wonderful stuff. And at the end of it, the instructor sort of recommended me to her agent. And he took it. He took me. And about a month later, after sort of a bidding war, I got a publishing contract. So after all that
That's
time
crazy.
Of doing it myself and digging in and moving the words around, and then the writers group, 2 years of that and back and forth, there it was. And I had just sort of continued to do it so much. By the time that they took that first book, I had 2 other books already there.
Right.
Books already done, because I got rejected, and I just kept
writing. Yep.
Kept writing. So by the time that first book sold, there were 2 others that are already done or semi-done, and they took all 3. And that started my career. But it took quite a while, a lot of stress and tension, and pulling your hair out and sort of moving things around.
Well, I think, and that's a pretty familiar story. And I think it's worth underscoring kind of what you were talking about. I mean, we've established you're an introvert. You're very happy there in your house. And you're, the amount of tension for going once a week to have your pages critiqued. Yeah. I mean, even, I've been writing for 20 years. We hold our group once a month, and it's just basically friends. And I still get nervous whenever I don't submit every time, but I get nervous because you're just like, I don't want to hear people hate it, or I don't. You're really vulnerable, and you're really putting yourself out there. And so I think that just underscores, how much you wanted it, because that is kind of what you have to do. You have to not only be vulnerable, but you have to accept. You have to listen, and you have to learn, and you have to be just kind of this receptacle willing to like take all this information in. But then
I think what you said before was true. You have to take the ego out of it. This is your work. This is your art. And you have to sort of recognize what's good about it, but you also have to be realistic and objective about what might not be working. And what you might sort of do to improve it. And if you can get that advice from something you've learned, or someone who's sort of standing in front of you, reading your pages and sort of giving you that feedback, you'd be a fool not to take it. So totally. That would be my great advice for most writers. Take the advice, take the feedback, take it from it what you need to take from it. Some of it you can disregard, but be there for the kernels of truth that you sort of need to progress your work.
And understand the motivation of the person giving that advice. Most of the time, it's all going to be, well-placed motivation. And once you're published and it's your editor, then you really have to like look at the, like, so for, we have lots of conversations about the editorial letter, which is a scary thing. But it always blows me away, like the authors, and I think there are only a few of them who are just like, no, I'm not changing anything. It's perfect the
Oh
way
yeah,
it is.
Stephen King. None of us are
Right.
Stephen King. Okay, King can take his editorial letter and throw it in the trash if he wants to. The
Right.
rest of us have to kind of pay attention.
But I think if you look at it from the lens of like, okay, everyone's just trying to make this book the best possible book to sell the most
Exactly.
possible copies. Why, I look at all my editorial letters over the years, and I could probably count on one hand the number of things that I didn't do, and they would always be like very minor, like, I don't know, character name, and I decided to keep it or whatever. But plot points, you're like, yeah, no, you're right. This totally would make this, even though it's a lot of work. It might be months of work. You don't,
Right.
but that's, I think you're right. I think having that, being able to take advice is huge, and knowing which advice to take. So then you have this book, and after all this time, you became a bidding war, as you said, and it feels like you went from nothing to a lot, as opposed to, a lot of journeys. It's just like you're gradually kind of building up. Was that just, how did you process, now I have this book out there that's doing really well and they want more, and this might be, a lifestyle change for me? Was that, after all this time, was that hard to kind of take in?
It kind of is, because you sort of set out to write one book, right? You sort of
right.
ramp everything up for this one thing, because you feel you have one book in you. And when it sort of becomes a job, then you kind of like making donuts at the donut place. One has to sort of follow the other. And it's a different sort of mindset, isn't it? You have to come up with ideas really quickly. That first book, I sort of meandered around for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years before, I figured out something.
Right.
But now you have to do it really quickly because they're looking for the next one. So it's a business now. And then all of the stuff that goes with the book, right? The marketing and the publishing of the publicity and all
the
that
social media
stuff,
and introverts love social media.
Now you got to tweet, and you got to be on Facebook, and you got to sort of photograph your breakfast for Instagram. I mean, you got to do all the other stuff,
signings,
with
events.
Which that's kind of fun for me. I kind of like sort of meeting
it's fun for me too, unless no one shows up, then it sucks.
What a tough business this is. But yeah, you're right. But yeah, so all of the other things that come with it. So that one book sort of turns into 5 or 6, or if you're lucky, that's a good problem to have. But it's just another thing, another sort of level, another
it's a job
you have to take. Exactly. And so you have to learn all the things that go with the job, and do them as the best you can, and sort of connect with readers and do it. So it's kind of fun. It's a lot stressful.
Yeah,
hard.
It is stressful. And when you're writing mysteries, it's kind of like, I've got to, there's a structure that's expected. And then there's also, I'm sure, a desire as the author to bend the rules around the structure without breaking them.
Right.
And that's a lot of work to find the creative ideas that can really make it a mystery, but also make it more than a mystery. And do you find yourself challenged with they want another book by the end of next year and I have 0 ideas, or I don't want to write this character anymore. I want to do something totally different. Does that ever kind of sink in with you?
Well, the start of this second series was supposed to be my first standalone, right? I had done the PaI series, and that was sort of done. And I was looking for new characters to write about, and that's where Harriet Foster came in. And I was writing it like that was going to be my first standalone. And when I handed it in, they wanted another one with the same characters in it. So now I'm in the second series, which is, again, a good problem to have. And then they just asked for a third one. So I now have to think of what the next case is going to be for this homicide team. But again, I would rather have that problem than have the other problem of sort of stacking these rejection letters up and waiting for my shot to show up. So
so you're not you're not killing off all your characters at the end, so there can't be a series.
I'm not complaining. It's fine. You just tell me what you want. So yeah, it's just fine. It's just sort of figuring out what you can sort of do to these characters to sort of move them along. You don't want them to stagnate. You want them to grow incrementally. And so for the next case, I'm going to have to move them along a little bit and sort of expand them, and also drop dead bodies somewhere. So it's all good.
Right.
It's all fine. It's just sort of coming up with that sort of balance between the convention of the genre and the invention, or what you can sort of add, that little twist, that little personal part of you that sort of moves it along. So
right. And what decisions you make with those characters and how, because I only write standalones. I have 8 standalones.
Perfect.
And because I want to kill anyone at any time. and I just like the world. I have nothing against series. I have never had an idea where I wanted to continue with that same character.
Mm-hmm.
But I assume you get feedback from readers and also from the industry about like, oh, I wish this hadn't happened to this one character in the 3rd book, or I wish these 2 people had gotten together. Whatever. People start to have those expectations for certain characters over the course of several books that they don't really have as much in a standalone. Does that, as you're writing, are you making decisions and you're kind of thinking like, oh my God, the readers would hate it if I did this?
No, I'm thinking about characters and story. That's all I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
What happens on the tail end happens on the tail end. But my motivation, my focus is sort of moving this story along, moving these characters along, having them learn or find out what they need to find out, and then getting to the end. And then what happens after that is something else. How the writers the readers sort of take it, that's bonus. If it's good, wonderful. If it's not, depending on what it is, I'll take it.
So do you have a fully formed outline before you start?
No, I got nothing. I'm a pantser.
I'm a pantser too. Yeah.
I have nothing when I start. I have maybe a kernel of an idea of what I think the case might be about.
Yeah.
I have my cast of characters that I can sort of be my chess pieces on the board. And I sort of pick through it page by page. It starts with a case, a dead body, a homicide. And the good thing about crime fiction is it sort of has a linear pattern already. The homicide detectives do this, and this, sort of in a linear progression. And my story sort of goes that way. Breadcrumbs are spread around and leads are sort of false or true. And that's how I kind of get to the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you stuck a lot. But that's kind of like that's part of the game.
Totally. And what's hard is when you're 80% in, and you're like, I have zero idea how this is going to resolve itself.
I have no idea where I'm going with this.
But on the other side of it, for me as a pantser as well, that those moments when you're actually in the process of physically writing, and then it just comes to you in that moment, like that's one of the greatest parts of writing to me, is like, oh my God, this is it. This is what this book is about. And sometimes you don't get to that point, but like that to me is why I write, is to have that moment of like, wow, what if this happened?
And I think the chances of you sort of getting through that sort of murky period is actually being at your desk with your fingers tapping on the keyboard.
Totally.
That's where it happens.
Right.
You can't do it in the grocery store.
There's something happening in your subconscious as you're writing something.
Exactly.
Something else is happening.
Exactly. So
it's
you can
weird.
be stuck and you're not sure where it's going, but as long as you sort of keep it going, you sort of break through. It's kind of like you break through a wall or something, and you there it is. There's the thread that you sort of lost 2 chapters back. And then now you can go and proceed and your story can move. But you have to sort of be there in order for that process to take place.
Now, a lot of crime fiction writers that I talk to are heavy researchers, not only because they need to, but because they love it. And I'm guessing, just with writing about homicide units, that you probably have your contacts and your people, and you vet stuff with actual homicide units. Does this make sense? Would this happen? Or do you just watch Law and Order and see what they do?
I ask questions. So I've never been a police officer. I don't know, what police officers do, but I know police officers. So when I get stuck, I write my story, whatever it's going to be. And if I get stuck and I need to know something, then I don't text or pick up a phone or email somebody and say, what would happen in this circumstances?
Right.
Who handles this? What happens this at this point? And then I just learn enough to sort of get me past that. And then I keep going. I don't like to do a lot of research, but basically because I don't find it interesting just for me.
I'm the exact same way.
I can't imagine readers sort of want to get bogged down in police procedure in a book. I mean, are interested in characters and story.
Right.
So I learned just enough to make it sound good or look authentic, and then I move on. If they want anything more than that, then there's nonfiction books out there on what police work is and what police officers do. But I'm interested in characters, what motivates them to move ahead, what makes them sort of want to solve this case. and that's it. Research is to me is like math, and I
It's
hate
homework.
math.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't like it.
Yeah, I agree. And isn't it obvious when you're reading somebody else's work and you're like, okay, the author learned this piece of information and
And
all
she's
they
gonna
wanted
put
to do
every
was,
freaking bit in there.
yeah, and just like, and I've seen it in my own work. I've gone and I have taken, I very rarely write about, police or detective work, but one novel I did, and I've got a good friend who's a detective, and he had this amazing story, and I basically put that whole story in my book in fictionalized form. It took up maybe 1,000 words, and then I read it. I'm like, I was just, this was for me. This is not propelling. It's interesting, but it's not propelling the story. It was just a cool story I heard. So you gotta cut that stuff out. And I always get stuck on people's work when I feel like, okay, Tom Clancy, I don't need to know exactly every little how a nuclear bomb detonates. Doesn't need to take
And I
40
don't think
pages.
readers really care about that. I mean, when you really look at the final thing, they're not looking at it for the technical part of it, just the feel of what maybe homicide detectives might go through, the feeling they might have about the job or the case they're on, and then move on and give them story and characters.
Yeah, because I think you can get away with a lot. Maybe get away is not the right, but I think you can do a lot, but by just having empathy as a writer,
Right.
because I think that's what it is. It's like, okay, there's a difference between this is what happens and then this is how they feel about what happens. And I think the feeling part to me is like the whole story. It's like, because that's what draws the reader in and makes the reader feel like, oh, geez, this could be me, as opposed to just they went from point A to point B and they solved the case. That's used quickly. That becomes bland, I think, after a while.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's hard sometimes to have that empathy and to figure it out especially if you're writing from a kind of the villain's perspective of like, why
even then, I mean, even if you're writing from the killer's perspective, I mean, the killer doesn't look at himself as a bad guy.
Not at all.
He's just out there doing what he needs to do.
It's his nature.
Exactly. So you can't sort of write them as this sort of one-dimensional evil character, because most people are not that. They are a mixture of that. So the killer's just doing what the killer does, and we have to sort of find that soft spot in him too. So that's the interesting part.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't think anyone wants a hero to be one-dimensional either. They want they want flaws all around, because the flaws are the interesting part. It's what side of that flaw you kind of like fall over onto is kind of what makes a difference. So, and have you been like, I know you still have a day job and stuff like that, kind of idea, but are you like kind of like, man, a lot of people are reading my books. This is amazing.
Yeah, I'm always surprised that sort of somebody comes back at me on website or something, says, "Oh, I just read your book. It's wonderful. I loved it." That's a good feeling. I mean, after you put a lot of work into a book, don't you?
Right.
I mean, you really some blood, sweat, and tears goes on to get a book to its final phases, and to sort of know that somebody out there other than your mother thought it was good and enjoyed reading it. It's always a fun thing to sort of have come back at you. So I always love it. I always love reading from hearing from readers, and it's all good. Keeps you going.
And on the other side of that coin is, all that blood, sweat, and tears, and someone's like, "Oh yeah, no, it was an easy little read. I read it on the airplane, and like, you didn't realize this took me a year to write, and I cried at the end, and it was just a throwaway Netflix show to you." But that's the reality of consuming content, is like, there's just so much out there, and you got to just be grateful for anyone looking at your stuff at all.
Yep.
Well, we're gonna wrap up. Before we do, we're gonna do a quick little storytelling. I've chosen 3 books off my bookshelf, and I'm gonna have you choose one of them, and we're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and then that's going to be the first sentence of a very, very, very short story, maybe 2 minutes long. So then you give me the next couple sentences, then I'll go and we'll see where it goes.
All right.
I got The Ruins.
Fast writer.
I got The Ruins by Scott Smith. Never Coming Home by Hannah Mary McKinnon.
That's good.
And Finalist by my buddy David Bell. So choose one of those.
Let's do Never Coming Home.
Okay. It's a good book.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I loved her writing a villain who was funny. Like, I thought that was fantastic. So give me a page between 1 and 350.
Let's do 211.
211. Okay, and then I'm just going to quickly scan and see if I have a sentence that might work. All right. My insides were on fire, my brain either melting or about to explode from all the hatred and guilt.
It's a man, right?
Could be whatever you want.
Right.
Doesn't have to adhere to that story, or I could go first.
I don't
whatever
know.
you want.
No, let's see. She looked at him, thinking of all the wasted years. He's standing in front of her, feeling this way. But what about the years she'd lost? The missed opportunities? What her life could have been if she hadn't been trapped in this marriage, in this house, in this town? Take it away.
And it's amazing how that sudden feeling that used to be a trickle for so many years, all of a sudden became a tidal wave. And it was exactly that, the waste of it all, what her life could have been. And it just consumed her all at once in this very second as they stood in the kitchen looking at each other. She saw everything that she'll never have because of him. And it made her want to do something.
That's why today was the last day of her marriage. That's why she'd made the plan, made the preparations. The kids were gone, the years were lost, but her life didn't have to be this, not a day longer. She reached into her pocket and took the gun out, the one she'd bought cheap and on the fly. She pointed it at him, smiled, and said, "This is the last day of our marriage. Tom, you can either leave or you can die. The choice is up to you. It's more of a choice than you gave me all those years ago."
She was surprised by his smile. It was the last thing she expected. Just a slow, kind of dopey grin, that smug look of satisfaction that didn't make any sense with the fact that he had a gun pointed right at the bridge of his nose. He said, "You're right. This is our last day of marriage. And I hope you enjoyed that cocktail I just made you."
Oh, that's good. It was a smugness that got her. Although she could feel lightheaded and she knew whatever he had put in her drink was taking effect, a bullet was faster than poison. So she fired. Not in the leg, not in the arm, in the head, right between his eyes. All those years of practice on the firing range had paid off. He went down like a ton of bricks. They would die together, but he would die first.
As she collapsed on top of him, she pushed herself away as much as she could because the last thing she wanted was to be found touching him. She wanted nothing more to do with him. And as the fog descended over her, and as the peace came upon her, and as her eyes slowly started to close, her very last thought was, "I forgot to feed the dog."
Awesome.
We'll call it an end there. That was good. See, there's your next series. Your next series. That's the scene that they find. The homicide finds the two dead bodies and a very hungry dog lapping up his blood.
Nothing helps conflict than a gun presenting itself. So
yes,
perfect.
Tracy, it was awesome to talk to you. What a fantastic conversation! I really enjoyed it.
It's so fun.
So continued congratulations with all your success, and I look forward to at either BoucherCon or Thriller Fest or Left Hand.
Are you going to BoucherCon?
I went last year. I don't have a book coming out this year, so I don't know if I'm going to. It's San Diego this year. Yep. I think. Yeah, it's pretty nice. So
I know, right?
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper than Thriller Fest. I love Thriller Fest, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see you there. But thank you for the conversation, and
thank
I appreciate
you so much.
All right, take care.
See you soon. All right, bye.
So that's it. That's my conversation with Tracy Clark. I really enjoyed talking to her. I feel like I laughed a lot. She had some really funny things to say. And she had some excellent wisdom and advice for aspiring and established writers. And I really enjoyed our story at the end. I thought that was a kind of a kick-ass story. It was kind of bittersweet, double homicide, and certainly her homicide squad's going to have to figure that one out. But I thought it flowed nicely. I thought we had a nice little mind meld going with that story. So I hope you pick up her latest book, Hide, and you want to find out more about her, just go to her website, which is tracyclarkbooks.com. And if you want to find out more about me and, subscribe to my newsletter or buy my books or check my appearance calendar, please just go to my website at carterwilson.com. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this episode. There are more episodes coming out very soon. In the meantime, thanks as always, everyone, for watching and or listening to this. Take care.